A lot of people think Kansas is just flat farmland and small-time charm, and they're not wrong. However, like many places, this one has its share of very dark secrets. And hidden behind those endless wheat fields and quiet streets are real-life crimes that are hard to believe actually happened. From unsolved serial killings and creepy stalkers and massacres, this is the Kansas they don't talk about in school. And once you hear these stories, you're never going to look at the Midwest the same way again. Now, this one was requested by one of our viewers, so thank you for that, and I hope y'all enjoy it. Here are 5 of Kansas's darkest true crime cases. Number 5, the I70 Killer. Now this one is a sort of ease into focusing just on Kansas, as it took place there, but also in a few other spots, so just allow me to explain. In the spring of 1992, there was a string of killings along Interstate 70 that rattled the heart of the American Midwest. And the victims, to which there were many, were all young store clerks, most of them brunettes. And the killer, well, they've never been caught. After all these years, could they still be out there, just hiding in plain sight? It all started on April 8th of 1992 at an Indianapolis, Indiana Payless shoe store. And 26-year-old Robin Folder was managing the place when she was shot and killed in the back storage room. Now, she was alone in the store at the time, and it was in the middle of the day. The killer took less than $100, and that was it. No one saw or heard a thing. It looked like a brutal robbery gone wrong, but then 3 days later, and 675 miles away in Wichita, Kansas, another similar killing. This time, 23-year-old Patricia Smith and 32-year-old Patricia Maggers were just about to close up La Bride d'Elegance, a small bridal shop. They stayed late that day to accommodate a guy who was coming to pick up a cummerbund around 6 p.m. And when he got there, they let him in, only this wasn't that customer. It was the killer. And both women were shot and killed, and the real customer arrived soon after, only to come face to face with the murderer. And the man had a gun, described later as an Uzi-style weapon. He told the customer to follow him, but that man refused, and the killer just let him go. And just like that, the killer walked away, only this time he left behind a living witness and someone who could help create a composite sketch. A couple weeks later, on April 27th, in Terre Haute, Indiana, 40-year-old Michael McCown was working alone in his mother's shop, Sylvia's Ceramics. And he was just stocking shelves when the killer struck, shooting him from behind. But Michael didn't match the profile of the killer's other targets, so what gives? He was the only male victim, so it could be that the killer was only interested in shooting store clerks. Though investigators believe this wasn't the case, that the shooter actually mistook Michael for a woman because of the store's name and because Michael wore his hair in a ponytail. So a tragic case of mistaken identity. May 3rd, in St. Charles, Missouri, 24-year-old Nancy Kitzmiller opened Boot Village at noon. And she wasn't supposed to even be there that day. She was covering for a coworker. By 2:30, customers found her body behind the counter, shot in cold blood. Then just 4 days later, on May 7th, in Raytown, Missouri, 37-year-old Sarah Blessing was working at a gift shop called Store of Many Colors when the killer struck again. A neighboring video store owner heard the gunshot and saw a man calmly exit the store and watched him walk up a hill right towards Interstate 70.
He was right, it was right here on the very end, and that was the door that the guy came out of.
So by now, the pattern was undeniable. A white man, mid-20s to 30s, sandy blonde or reddish hair, thin with lazy eyelids. Always targeting small specialty shops near I-70. Always shooting victims in the back of the head, and always taking just a little cash and leaving fast. and the press dubbed him, appropriately, the I-70 Killer.
A shoe store in Indianapolis, a ceramic shop in Terre Haute, a bridal shop in Wichita, an herbal medicine store outside Kansas City, another shoe store near St. Louis, all murder scenes.
But then, once news was on every front page, the killing stopped, at least in the Midwest. But in 1993 and 94, 3 similar shootings occurred in Texas, which made people wonder had the murderer just found a new hunting ground. And first was 51-year-old Mary Glascock in Fort Worth, shot dead in her antique store. Then 22-year-old Amy Vest, murdered in Arlington at a dancewear shop. And finally, 35-year-old Vicky Webb, working in Houston at a gift shop. The killer shot her in the back of the head like the others, but this time something went wrong. The bullet hit a vertebrae and didn't penetrate her skull. She survived. In tremendous pain that you couldn't imagine, she played dead while the killer tried to shoot again. Only his gun jammed and eventually just gave up and left.
Put the gun back to my forehead, he went click, and he chuckled. So he's a very sick man.
And Vicky is the only known survivor of the I-70 Killer, but even her terrifying account didn't bring the case any closer to closure. Ballistics linked those Texas shootings to one another, but not the original I-70 murders. Still, though, the MO is chillingly similar, so perhaps he just got a new weapon. In 2001, almost a decade after the first killing, another store clerk was shot execution style in Terre Haute, Indiana. And this time it was 31-year-old Billy Brosman, who was working alone at a liquor store. Surveillance footage showed a white male suspect calmly robbing the place and then leading Brosman to the back and shooting him in the head. And that crime occurred just blocks from the site of Michael McCown's murder in '92, so could the I-70 Killer really have returned after nearly 10 years? It's possible, but even with the footage, this killer remains a ghost. Police have released some age-progressed images in the off chance that they might still catch him. But at this point, he's either dead or an elderly man, just sitting back on his porch somewhere, laughing to himself about how he got away with it all. Number 4. Who Killed Alonzo? On April 3rd, 2004, 23-year-old Alonzo Brooks made a last-minute decision to join some friends at a party in rural Lacine, about an hour outside his home in Gardner, Kansas. Wasn't exactly his crowd or his hometown, but he figured, why not? So, as many of us would, Alonzo got a ride from a friend and showed up ready to have a good time. It was a big gathering, so worth the drive it seemed. There were about 100 people at this shindig, a mix of teens and young adults. And almost immediately, Alonzo stood out. Not just because he was one of the only black men at the party, but because some guests didn't seem happy he was there. Friends later said there were some unflattering comments thrown his way. A few attendees reportedly used slurs, and the vibe shifted in the place. Alonzo got separated from his friends, one of whom left, mistakenly thinking someone else would give him a ride home, but no one did. And that was the last time anyone saw the young man alive. The next day, Alonzo's family panicked when they realized he hadn't come home. They called his friends, and when they had no answers, they then called the police. A search began, but right away, things started feeling a little bit off. According to the Brooks family, law enforcement seemed indifferent about the whole situation. Search efforts were slow. While Alonzo's boots and hat were found on the side of the road near the party house, there were no other clues.
The FBI continues to investigate to find out if Alonzo may have been the victim of a hate crime. According to some witnesses at the party, Alonzo was threatened and was the target of racial slurs.
The FBI eventually joined in, but by then weeks had passed. And then, almost exactly 1 month later on May 1st, Alonzo's body was discovered. and when his family said the police weren't pulling their weight, they weren't kidding. His body wasn't found by the cops, but by them, in a creek just 650 feet from the house where the party took place. And something even stranger is that this area had already been searched multiple times supposedly by authorities. So, how'd they miss him? I mean, was his body moved? Had someone perhaps hidden him for some time? An autopsy, they hoped, could help determine a cause of death, but there were no broken bones, no visible signs of trauma, no drugs or alcohol in his system. And so officially, the case went cold. Just one of those strange incidents that happens in this world that have no full explanation. And for 16 years, the Brooks family pushed for justice, as they believed Alonzo had been the victim of a hate crime, that someone or multiple people had attacked him that night, but there were no witnesses who came forward and no arrests, just rumors and the pain of the unanswered questions. In 2020, though, everything changed. And Netflix released an episode of Unsolved Mysteries featuring Alonzo's case, and suddenly the public was paying attention again.
This is the family of Alonzo Brooks setting up a watch party for a new Netflix crime series called Official Unsolved Mysteries that features his story.
The FBI reopened the investigation. Alonzo's body was exhumed for a second autopsy. The reward for information was set at $100,000. In April of 2021, the FBI publicly announced what Alonzo's family had known all along. His death was now ruled a homicide. That second autopsy revealed injuries to his body that were not consistent with normal decomposition or an accidental death. Someone had hurt him, and somebody killed him. But here's where it gets maddening. No one has been arrested, and not a single suspect has been named. Authorities believe multiple people know what happened, and they're banking on someone breaking their silence. The FBI even stated that the passage of time can provide a new perspective. In other words, they're hoping guilt may finally outweigh fear, and we all do too. Number 3, the Poet Stalker. It all started with a phone call, and then came the notes, then the attacks. And just when it seemed like the killer, known only as the Poet, would finally strike for the last time, everything unraveled. And not because of a breakthrough, but because the truth was stranger and more disturbing than anybody could have imagined. In Wichita, Kansas, back in 1977, Ruth Finley was an upstanding citizen, a churchgoer, and a wife. She worked as a secretary at a local telephone company, married to a man named Ed, and their life was quiet and predictable. But then a series of anonymous phone calls began coming into their home where the voice on the other end doesn't speak, just breathes.
Hello?
Not long after that, the letters start coming. These are handwritten, laced with unsettling poetry. The words are fragmented, disjointed, almost delusional. And the sender calls himself the Poet, and he makes one thing clear. He's watching Ruth. And he knows where she goes, what she wears, what she eats. And sometimes he includes newspaper clippings, sometimes just phrases that seem to make no sense, kind of like this. Roses are red, violets are blue. I'm watching you die, and I'll be there too. Now, the police took the letters very seriously. You have to remember that this was right around the same time that Wichita was also going through the horrors of BTK, who was another anonymous letter-writing stalker who did kill. So the idea that a new predator might be lurking or that BTK was now focused on her wasn't that far-fetched. And Ruth, well, she was terrified. Over the next few years, the harassment escalated, and the Poet started calling her at work and sent letters to her husband. On one occasion, Ruth was found dazed and hysterical in a park with her clothes torn and wrists bruised, and she says the Poet drugged her and tried to abduct her. Another time, she's discovered locked in the trunk of her own car with a note shoved in her mouth. Police began trailing her movements, and surveillance increased and security alarms were installed at her home. But the poet always seemed to slip through the cracks.
Number one, why she was being threatened. Number two, why she was kidnapped and what this individual really had in mind that he wanted to do to her when he was able to kidnap her and take her away somewhere.
FBI profilers reviewed the case and they agreed that Ruth was being targeted, but they couldn't get a handle on who would be doing this. The letters were just too inconsistent, the behavior erratic, so nothing added up. And then, one day, after 6 years of torment, in 1983, it all stops. There are no more calls or notes or attacks, just silence. That is until one night when Ruth and Ed get into a minor domestic dispute. It's nothing out of the ordinary, except that Ruth storms out of the house and doesn't come back for hours. Concerned, Ed calls the police, and when they track her down, Ruth is incoherent, disoriented, and holding a knife. As detectives start reviewing everything again, well, they begin noticing patterns, ones that always had been there but hadn't stood out. Ruth had reported being attacked in areas where no one else had seen a thing. The handwriting on the letters? A match for her own, except slightly altered. And those bruises on her body? Just superficial. During one attack, her clothes were ripped in a way that experts say looked staged. So they press her, gently at first, then more firmly, until finally Ruth breaks and she confesses, saying she had orchestrated all of it, that there was no poet, she was the poet.
It was like I couldn't quite figure out what was wrong with me, that I surely hadn't done all this.
And they were confronting you with evidence.
Mm-hmm. And it was like after he showed me the picture, it was coming back, it was coming in my mind, some of the things I had done. It was very embarrassing, humiliating.
The motive as to why she would do this turned out to be a complex mixture of trauma, repression, and mental illness. Her childhood had included incidents of abuse, memories she had never processed. And the persona of the poet in her own mind had become a vessel for that repressed pain, a separate identity she could fear and fight while still being a victim. And she wasn't faking for attention. She believed it was all actually happening. Number 2, the Witchita Massacre. In the throes of the holiday season in December of 2000, brothers Reginald and Jonathan Carr rolled on into Wichita, Kansas. Only they weren't there to spread holiday cheer or hand out any presents to kids. No, these two were about to create a huge wave of chaos that culminated in an event that has gruesome details that are hard to even talk about. Just 4 days after arriving in town, the Carr brothers, who were no strangers to violence, approached Andrew Schreiber, a 23-year-old who they brought to an ATM and forced him to withdraw cash. After he complied, well, they shot him like it was nothing. Luckily, he would survive, but he wouldn't be the last target. 3 days after that, they struck again, and their victim this time was Ann Walenta, a 55-year-old librarian who was ambushed in her own driveway before being shot 3 times while attempting to flee. Ann clung to life for weeks in the hospital, but ultimately succumbed to her injuries, and still, no one was realizing yet that a pattern was forming. But it was December 14th that would define the horror that came to be known as the Witchita Massacre. That night, the Carrs broke into a house at 12727 East Birchwood Drive. Inside were 5 friends: Brad Haka, Heather Mueller, Aaron Sander, Jason Befford, and Jason's girlfriend, a woman identified publicly only as Holly G. They were educated, kind, and well-respected in the community, and teachers, financial analysts, people with dreams and futures. Aaron was even looking to become a priest at the time of this incident. The Carrs came in and held them all at gunpoint, demanding money. As they ransacked the house, they found a ring hidden in a popcorn box. And Jason had planned to propose to Holly soon. Instead, though, their moment of joy turned into a scene of unimaginable brutality. The victims were all stripped naked and then bound. The Carr brothers assaulted the two women and then forced the men to violate the women and each other, and turned the entire ordeal into a sadistic power game. The group was all in survival mode, and when the brothers had enough of that game, they loaded the group up into a pickup truck and forced them to drive to multiple ATMs, clearing out every cent they had. And so, now what? What should the Carrs do now that they had their night of lucrative fun? At the edge of the city, on a frozen soccer field, the Carrs forced their victims into the icy dark and made them kneel in the snow, then shot each one in the head. They then drove over their bodies with the truck before fleeing into the night, and 4 of the 5 were dead. But one, Holly, survived. A small plastic hair clip deflected the bullet just enough to spare her life. Bleeding and naked, she staggered over a mile through freezing conditions before reaching help. The couple who found her called police, and Holly, despite her injuries, told them everything.
These 2 men broke into our house, and they held us, and they took everything, and they executed my 4 friends, and I've been shot in the head. We need an ambulance.
Back at the house, the Carrs returned to loot anything they'd missed, and to add insult to injury, they beat Holly's dog Nicky to death with a golf club. By the following day, the Carr brothers were in custody, and what followed was one of the most chilling and highly publicized trials in Kansas history. With Holly's testimony and ID confirmations from both Schreiber and Ann before she passed, the evidence was overwhelming. Reginald faced 50 charges and Jonathan 43, and in 2002, both were sentenced to death. In 2004, though, the Kansas Supreme Court overturned the state's death penalty law, triggering a domino effect of appeals. The Carr brothers' sentences were caught in legal limbo for over a decade, but ultimately, because of just how horrific their crime was, in 2016, the U.S. Supreme Court reinstated their death sentences in an 8-1 decision. And currently, both remain on death row at El Dorado Correctional Facility. Number 1. The Internet's first serial killer. Scoutmaster, baseball coach, Sunday school teacher, and even a Man of the Year award from the City Council of Kansas City. And this is who John Edward Robinson was, but they say you should never judge a book by its cover. And in John's case, that couldn't be more accurate. There was always something off with John, but he was able to weave his way out of trouble and make it appear like nothing had ever happened. He started off stealing money in his mid-20s. In 1969, he was arrested for embezzling over $30,000 from a doctor's office. And 3 years later, he was arrested again for stealing from an insurance company this time. Then came securities fraud, mail fraud, check forgery. But over and over again, Robinson slipped through the cracks, getting probation or serving short sentences. And all that Scoutmaster goody two-shoes stuff was just a way to balance out the bad things he was doing, hoping that the truth of who he was, or was perceived to be, lay somewhere in the middle. A misguided man, perhaps, from a bad childhood, trying to do right in the world. Though, as it turns out, it was much worse than anyone could have imagined. Robinson wasn't just stealing money, he was stealing lives. In 1984, he hired 19-year-old Paula Godfrey to work for one of his fake businesses. She told her family she was being sent off to Texas for training, and days later she vanished. Her parents received a typed letter supposedly from Paula saying she was fine and didn't want contact, and the police believed it, so that case was closed. A year later, under the alias John Osborne, he met Lisa Stassi, 19-year-old mother living at a Kansas City women's shelter with her infant daughter, Tiffany. He offered her housing, a job, and financial help, and all she had to do was sign a few forms. Lisa vanished within days, and Tiffany, he sold her off for adoption, making $5,500 in cash. And the pattern continued from there. In '87, Robinson lured 27-year-old Catherine Clampett from Texas to Kansas with promises of a job and travel. Well, she disappeared that summer. While in prison for fraud between '87 and '93, Robinson met Beverly Bonner, the prison librarian. After his release, she left her husband and followed him to Kansas, where she disappeared, though her alimony checks, as it turns out, never stopped being cashed. By the mid-90s, Robinson had discovered the internet. He quickly realized it gave him something new, access to a whole lot of women. Under the username Slave Master, he entered BDSM chat rooms and posed as a wealthy, experienced dominant looking for submissive women. He offered them contracts, literally, laying out their roles as his slaves. In 1994, 45-year-old Sheila Faith and her 15-year-old daughter Debbie, who had spina bifida, responded to one of Robinson's posts. He offered to ease the burden of the medical bills they were incurring, so the two moved from Colorado to Kansas City, and then were just gone. In 1999, Polish immigrant Izabela Lewicki accepted a proposal from Robinson. This was an actual one that included a ring, but wouldn't you know it, she disappeared that summer. And then came Suzette Troughton, a nurse from Michigan. She had been corresponding with Slave Master and soon was never seen alive again.
Listen, have you heard from Susie?
Susie? Golly, no, not for, I guess since the first of the month. From what I understand, they're not coming back they're going on a trip from there, they're going to whatever's next and going east or west, I guess.
But by 2000, police were finally starting to see the pattern. Women, all with ties to Robinson, were vanishing, and many had left behind clues, emails, letters, messages to friends, and typed letters supposedly written by the victims saying they were fine. Finally, though, it all caught up with them. A battery complaint gave authorities just enough to get a search warrant. When they arrived at his property, they found 2 barrels, and inside the bodies of Isabella and Suzette. Searches of storage units turned up others: Beverly Bonner, Sheila, and Debbie Faith. Because he was on the internet early and luring women to him directly from it, he is considered the internet's first killer, though he's very far from the last. Sure, the World Wide Web gives us access to a whole lot of great things, but it opens us up to be preyed upon too. And currently at the age of 81, and with at least 8 known victims under his belt, John sits on death row at the same place as the Carr brothers, El Dorado Correctional Facility. And so there were Kansas's darkest true crime cases. That's a wrap on today's episode. If y'all enjoyed it, check out some of our other videos and podcasts. We have a whole lot of them spread around the internet. Links are down in the description. Y'all stay safe out there. I'll see you over in the next one.